Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Lockport Township, Illinois, Tuesday, May 7th, 2024, 5:30 p.m. 45-year-old Melissa Robertson had a problem. One of her neighbors, a man who had decided he was going to make it a point to harass and threaten her along with her children. You see, Melissa Robertson is white, but her children are black. As a result, this neighbor had been subjecting them to a nonstop campaign of insults, racial slurs, such as calling Melissa Robertson a nigger lover, and calling her children niggers, by the way, as well as other harassment and threats. The family said that this behavior had been going on since they moved to the area 10 years ago. Just in March of this year alone, Will County deputies were called to this individual's home twice, following a complaint that he shot fireworks and possibly a gun over Robertson's fence, as well as for him acting very agitated and yelling at her and her children. A neighbor had said that the police had been called to this racist man's house many times in recent years, but nothing was ever done about it. So he was on their radar for years. The family tried to put a case on this thug, but the police kept claiming that there was nothing they could do. On the evening of May 7th, Melissa Robertson was outside with a friend who had brought her child. One of Melissa's children, her 8-year-old son, was also with her. That was when the racist neighbor decided to start his harassment again. This time, he began revving the engine to his motorcycle. Finally, Melissa took out an air horn and blew it in his direction. The racist neighbor then yelled, "There's going to be a dead nigger today," and he threw a bottle over the fence at Melissa. Melissa's friend took the children inside the house while Melissa went to confront the racist thug, and that was when he shot her twice. After this, the shooter then ran back into his home. Police eventually arrived, but he refused to come out. He had barricaded himself inside. This led to a standoff. After a while, a crisis negotiator was able to convince the criminal to come out. Of course, they took him in alive because he wasn't black. The attempted murderer was identified as 70-year-old John Shadbar. This Nosferatu-looking degenerate looks exactly like the kind of reprobate who would do something like this. During a search of Shadbar's home, a whole cache of illegal weapons were found hidden behind a wall, including 2 AK-47 style rifles, a shotgun, and 2 handguns. The AK-47 is believed to be the gun that he used in his attempted murder. And you won't be surprised to learn that Shadbar shouldn't have had any weapons at all because he had been arrested for a felony in 1979, but you can be sure that's not his only conviction. As I mentioned earlier, back in March of this year, the Robertsons reported this guy for pointing a gun at them. Since he's a felon, he's not allowed to have a firearm, and the police should have arrested him right then and there, but of course they didn't, and that's for the same reason that they allowed him to harass and threaten this family, because under white supremacy, laws don't apply to some people. The heroes, as they were called in the police and sheriff's departments, allowed these race soldiers to remain on the streets because to the police, they're all part of the same organization. The John Shadbars of this world are the irregular forces of white supremacy. The non-uniformed thugs who the police protect and often coordinate with to carry out precisely these kind of racial assaults. Melissa Robertson had suffered a gunshot wound to her abdomen that damaged her colon and spleen and shattered multiple ribs, which were removed during surgery. Another bullet tore off parts of her thumb and index finger, requiring reconstructive hand surgery. Now, this Shadbar character is facing 9 counts, and he's being held without bond. Now, had it been a black person he had tried to kill, it's doubtful that he'd be facing any counts at all, and he would certainly have been offered bond. So understand, the only reason this guy is facing the prospect of prison is because he tried to kill another white person. The police allowed this race terrorist to threaten this family for years on end, and they did nothing about it because the police are as racist as this animal is. The public is outraged about how this crime was allowed to happen, and naturally the sheriff's office is white-splaining and trying to bestow innocence on themselves. In fact, they actually had the nerve to thank what they called the heroes from the sheriff's office and the police department for responding to a situation that they themselves allowed to fester and to get to this point. The very creeps who were the most responsible for this tragedy having happened were being called heroes after they deliberately spent years refusing to do anything about this criminal. They're not heroes. They're cowards at best and racist collaborators at worst. But here these bastards are trying to bestow innocence on themselves when this was one of their buddies who did this. And I call him their buddy because while you'll be surprised to learn that this Shadbar person is married, you won't be surprised to learn that his wife works in law enforcement. She's a correctional officer at the Cook County Sheriff's Office. So, there's barely 1 degree of separation between this guy and the very sheriffs who refused to arrest him. This was why he was so emboldened. You know those racist cops were giving him a pat on the back all these years and an attaboy for his hate crimes. They had all they needed to arrest him, but they're all on the same team, of course, so they weren't going to do anything. He was doing their dirty work for them, and they were allowing it. They need to be sued, and criminal cases need to be put on them for refusing to do their jobs and allowing this race attack to occur. Now, what I want to know is, at a time like this, where are the white right-wing nuts at to tell us that we need to crack down on hate crimes? After all, if teaching history is a crime because it might hurt some white parents' feelings, then certainly these conservatives should be going ballistic about this, right? Except they've never been bothered by hate crimes. To them, hate crimes laws criminalize being white. That's what they themselves have said. As they see it, to criminalize racially motivated violence criminalizes being white. Now, why would they think that? You have to ask, what is their definition of white? We'll continue with the moment of truth in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power tools, because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. Also, since the Fox News crowd is constantly paranoid about crime in and around the Chicago area, why aren't they calling out the woke policing that allowed this criminal to remain on the loose? After all, this criminal was allowed to commit crime after crime year after year, threatening people with guns, and the police refused to do anything about him. This is a clear-cut case of police being woke, refusing to enforce the laws, and this was the tragic result. Except the white right never thinks that the police are woke for not arresting someone so long as the person isn't black. And they also have no problem with prosecutors refusing to prosecute so long as the individual who's been charged has committed a hate crime. This is why there needs to be an anti-black hate crime law, because black people are the overwhelming majority of hate crimes victims in America, but also because these anti-black racists make it a point to attack anyone who they see as being on our side. From Kyle Rittenhouse to that Daniel Perry shooter who murdered a white man in Texas because that white man had been a Black Lives Matter protester. And in case you didn't know, Greg Abbott, the Klansman-in-Chief of Texas, he actually pardoned that murderer. He told the Texas Board of Pardons, who are nothing more than his rubber stamp, that he wanted to give this guy a pardon even before he had been sentenced. Now keep in mind, this is a white man who was convicted by a jury of his peers. He also had a history of racist posts on social media, even saying that he wanted to go and kill some BLM protesters, which is exactly what he did. This was a guy who was actually prosecuted rightly. Prosecutors threw the book at him, as they should, and yet the Republicans, they want this guy out on the streets. Whatever happened to prosecutors aren't being tough enough? These are the same Republicans who claim that prosecutors are woke, that they're not convicting enough people. But when they do, the Republicans go, not like that. You're not supposed to be prosecuting these people. And on a side note, this Perry character only became a cause celeb to the white right after Tucker Carlson got on his little sideshow and whined about how this white supremacist got convicted, which he deserved. That was when Greg Abbott decided to jump on that particular bandwagon. Even before the sentence was handed down, Abbott was saying that he was going to pardon him. He hadn't even looked at the case, wasn't familiar with the particulars. All this mentally deranged punk knew was Tucker Carlson was saying this was an opportunity to send a racial message, and Abbott has never missed an opportunity to do that. I think it's important to point this out because this is the same Tucker Carlson who Ice Cube was yucking it up with and saying that racism wasn't really a problem when it was overblown, and he just loved just cheesing, palling around with this creep. You see, giving moral support to degenerates like Tucker Carlson is not some victimless crime. These white supremacists are and have always been aided and abetted by the state. That's the only way that they can operate. This is a war they're fighting against decent society, and good people need to make sure they're ready and prepared to defend themselves. You cannot reform a white supremacist, nor can you reason with one. Melissa Robertson tried, and she almost lost her life as a result. Daniel Perry's victim tried to reason with him and did lose his life. and the white supremacist made sure that he's not going to be punished for it. Kenneth Walker and John White gave practical examples of how to defend yourself from white supremacists who try to harm you. You have a right to be safe wherever you are, whether in your home or if someone tries to threaten you out in public. You have a right to take measures to ensure that you're not harmed. The enemy is blatantly ignoring their own empty rhetoric and the law in order to let murderers go free and in order to encourage their anti-black hate crime violence. As long as they're killing the right people, they'll continue to have the police say there's nothing they can do. And even if they do get convicted by a jury, they'll have some white supremacist politician who says, well, we need to be letting them go. If it's a white supremacist who's being punished, the white right will suddenly decide that prosecutors are too hard on criminals. And the white left is not going to do anything in order to retaliate, which is what they should be doing. These race terrorists know that they have the support of the authorities. What they don't know is whether the public's going to wise up to this fact and start being realistic about defending itself. The enemy is carrying out racial ambushes. That's what the man Daniel Perry murdered didn't understand. He was able to protect himself, but he wasn't ready to. You have to assume that when someone posts racist messages online about wanting to kill BLM protesters and then they run red lights so they can drive their vehicle into a crowd of protesters, they didn't do it because they want to talk. They came there to carry out an ambush kill. When you have a racist punk who drives his vehicle into a crowd full of innocent people and then he pulls a gun, or you got some racist neighbor who's been throwing racial slurs at you and he says there's going to be some dead niggers today and he pulls a gun, it's a mistake for you to wait and see if they'll pull the trigger next. You have to be ready and willing to protect yourself. Yes, it's terrible that this is the status quo we have, but that's because there haven't been enough instances of law-abiding citizens protecting themselves against these race terrorists. The bad guys have the mental calculus that they can harass and threaten black people or anyone who they see as not being hostile towards black people, and the police, prosecutors, politicians, and judges will not only protect them but praise them. That's the reality. They've taken the mental calculus that their victims won't defend themselves either, even in the face of this non-stop litany of hate crimes. The white supremacists look at the society in general and black people in specific as being nothing more than a bunch of targets that they can kill at will. And since the white supremacists happen to have the police, the prosecutors, politicians, and judges on their side, they feel as if the public is sufficiently intimidated from protecting themselves. Well, it's time for the people to prove that these race soldiers seriously miscalculated. The police refuse to arrest or prosecute these criminals, and that means you have to be ready to protect yourself and your family. Not only is self-defense your right, it's also the right thing to do. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Dondi Waddell, Andrew Lewis, Richard Griffith, Corey Monroe, and Kenneth Prescia. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.